everybody. Welcome today to another episode of Tough Topics in LD. I was going to say unprofessional. Oh, bloody hell.
Professional. No, I think we'll leave that in. Very unprofessional. Yes. Bunch of idiots.
Yes. I'll start again. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Tough Topics in LD. The unscripted, unplanned, but certainly not unprofessional web chat and discussion about all things learning disability, professional services and people and families. And this episode is called Burning the Bridges, Who Holds the Matches? And today we have with us, as usual, Alistair.
Hi, everybody.
And Helen.
Hi, everybody.
So just to get into things today, we managed that one really well, Shaun, that intro. Good work, mate.
Fourth time lucky.
Yeah, 14th time lucky. Yeah, don't lie. So yeah, as Shaun said, we have got, the talk today is around burning bridges, and we're joined by Helen Hassell, who is a mother of a young man with complex disabilities. And I'm sure I will let's give you a bit of time now, Helen, to introduce yourself and explain your background, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, of course. I'm mum to Carl, who is 24, nearly 25. Carl has both physical and learning disabilities. He's a full-time wheelchair user, but more importantly, he's an avid sports fan, both watching stuff to do with sport and also outside COVID, really participating in sport. That seems to be his key driver for engagement in anything we do in his life. So yeah, never a quiet moment.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. And this sort of conversation has come around again. You know, we try and pick up on themes that we've seen on social media and things that we're aware happening within clinical practice. And one of the themes that I was discussing with a couple of weeks back was around engaging with families. And you know, we know as health professionals, and you know, person watching this as a health professional, that families are given labels, and you know, troublesome families. And you know, for full disclosure, I was one of the physiotherapists who works with Carl, and therefore know Helen, who was given the label and passed on as a label of, you know, maybe a little bit of additional baggage, so-called problem parents, and she's lived up to that in every single way, shape, and form. No, genuinely, I think. We were very keen to manage relationships, and I think Helen's somebody who's able to speak about, you know, why relationships are important and what can happen when things go wrong. So Shaun, shall we get into sort of the first sort of topic today?
Sure. Before going forward, though, I thought I'd just talk about the title. I mean, we eventually settled on Burning Bridges, Who Holds the Matches, and I think just before proceeding, you know, just reflect on the fact that, you know, it is adversarial out there. I'm not sure if everybody's experienced it, and why does anybody need to hold the matches? But anyway, before going, so the first question we've got, which I'd like to know a little bit more, because obviously me being a student, I'm not necessarily a professional yet. I might be one day. Let's see. To begin with, so I thought I'd start off with asking, you know, why are relationships with families so important for healthcare professionals or professionals in general?
You want to start, Alistair, and then I'll interject.
Okie dokie. I think as both a family member and a professional of somebody with a learning disability and a professional, I think families are front and center in many of the people with learning disabilities lives, and if there are a lot of, you know, even when you get to the point where people have hit transitions and they've gone into adult services, if you cannot foster and maintain positive relationships with families, then it will affect your health outcomes significantly. And that is not to say that families are somehow, you know, will withdraw, but you know, you require buy-in in the same way that in a standard, from a physio point of view, musculoskeletal service where you're dealing with back pain, you need to get somebody on board and gain education and rapport with that individual. With somebody with a learning disability, you obviously need that for that person, but you need to do that for the people who are going to be supporting that person for the bulk of their time. I'm very aware that we as healthcare professionals see people for fractions of somebody's day. And what I see in an hour session is typically not representative of the individual throughout the rest of their day. And if anything, speaking to a lot of families, we get the best of people in physio because it's fun, it's different, it's physical, we're getting endorphins going, we're quite energetic, there's music that people like or don't like. And so, we can get that buy-in. But if you do not have that, particularly in paediatric services, but with the learning disabilities being slightly unique all the way through into adult services, then you're going to have, you're going to severely have a detrimental impact to how that person is cared for.
No, I'd agree there. And I think the relationship with the family is paramount because, like I said in my intro, Carl is not his disability. Actually, you need to know what Carl's drivers are in order to work with him and help him reach his potential and then maintain that level of engagement. And if you don't know what makes him tick, you're not going to get that engagement. So often, I've certainly got a young man who won't tell you front and center how to engage with him. He'll watch you struggle and try and work it out and make it as difficult as humanly possible. Now, actually, if you've got that relationship with me, then I can help shape those conversations and probably save an awful lot of your time. And as Alistair said, we do an awful lot of the work at home. If you expect us to help support that professional side of things, you've got to have buy-in from us as well. You've got to develop those relationships. You've got to have got our trust. Got to have got our respect, and that respect should go two ways. Sadly, it doesn't always. And I think that's usually as a result of baggage that people have accrued as they've journeyed through. Certainly, if you've done this from day dot in paediatrics, you carry an awful lot of baggage, and you don't really ever put that down. You just learn to lock it away in a different way as you become more experienced. And I think it is about meeting the individual's potential, looking at what their needs are. Parents need to be seen as equal partners, not, from a professional point of view, they're there to do what we tell them. And certainly, I'm just laughing at your idea that you bring the best out of them at a session. I also have a young man that because physio belongs in one place, you do that in that place. One of my massive challenges, and it remains a challenge today, is the fact that you don't transpose those things across. So I can do exactly the same thing, but I don't get that buy-in because that doesn't belong in that box, that belongs in that box. Mm-hmm. And actually, if I haven't got that relationship with any therapist that's involved in our life, they probably just think I'm being lazy, as opposed to the fact that I actually physically cannot force a 24-year-old to do any therapies. That's a choice that he's allowed to make. That doesn't make me useless. It just means that I'm aware of his capacity and what I can and can't do with him.
Certainly, Helen. And I think you touched on a really good point there around the need for additional support. And, I've been advocating for a while now that, people with lifelong disabilities, particularly those who have learning disability or anybody potentially who compartmentalizes their working day, that they will require additional support that isn't just here's a 6-week block, see you later, off you go, call us if there's any problem. Or call us when you're in crisis. It's more often or not the case. And I think come back to the original question, because I know that I'm a great waffler at going around a subject, not necessarily get into the meat and bones. But when we break it down, people with learning disabilities require additional support to engage in the majority of areas, not all, and it's variable depending on individual, but the majority of areas of their life, they require additional support. Who's the person who's going to be providing that support? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be families. So it seems that, you sort of see from that point of view, and I know Rachel, the Born at the Right Time, talks heavily about the amount of hats that parents have to wear. And, it's so easy if you haven't got that rapport or relationship, that your area or the area that you're trying to get an outcome from for the individual is going to be hindered because there's so many other things to do.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. We are part of the network of therapy on whatever that care needs to be. We do wear multiple hats, but almost all of us as parents or carers actually only want the best for the individual that we're supporting. And that's a lot better if it's done without conflict.
Which is biggie to that point, the idea that I find it very difficult as a student to get my head around the fact that there is that conflict, and the fact is that what should override that is the fact that everybody wants the best for the person, and it just doesn't necessarily seem that way. The dynamics, yeah. Yeah, as a student, I find it baffling anyway that doesn't happen, and I'm sure you've both been in situations where there has been considerable conflict, despite wanting the best for the individual.
So
Yeah.
I think it's really important to talk about how things can go wrong, and this is one of the reasons we've got Helen here, because unfortunately Helen has been through some of these situations, and I wondered if you'd be able to share some of your experiences, Helen, of how things haven't necessarily gone to the script for you and Carl.
I think even more so in COVID, I know we're going to touch on that later on, we're, as parents, incredibly isolated. We're expected to wear every single hat that's thrown at us, whether that is being mum, being carer, being amazing PA administrator, because trust me, you have to have a degree in all of that, HR management type of stuff. We've suddenly got to become professional physio assistants, occupational therapy assistants, speech and language, as well as nurses, almost doctors, all of that all rolled into one, and we're expected to have that by the end of day one. Amazingly enough, we don't accrue that knowledge quickly. It's cumulative, and it doesn't always go the way that we want it as parents. For me, the biggest breakdowns come when people don't communicate effectively and tell me what can and can't be done within realistic confines of a system. So it may be that I see Carl's needs as having very regular hydrotherapy through paediatrics. I know we had real issues with physical physiotherapy through later on in children's, because in the early part of children's we were living in an area that had money in the NHS, it had money in the world, the economy was in a great place, provision wasn't a problem. So we had loads and loads of provision and help. That, as times went on, and even before the current provision of austerity, even before that, services are being cut, staff are being reduced, staff are stressed and tired, and so provision isn't happening. So who are we as parents going to conflict with? It's the people we see on a daily basis, not the people that are behind in management that are asking for those cuts to be made. So we went from having very regular therapy to almost nothing at all. And as a parent, how do I work that out when actually his needs haven't changed? He's not suddenly curable, amazingly enough, but you're telling me that he doesn't need or meet the requirements for that provision. And rather than explain your issues that you're having in the background, it's very much communication. Well, this is what it is, you've got to get on with it. And that's where these breakdowns happen. I certainly do come with a reputation of being slightly stubborn, slightly difficult. I can be incredibly challenging, but that's my job. That's my first job, is to be the advocate for my child, to make sure that he receives the best possible service and care to enable him to live his best life. And I make no apologies for that part of my character. Have I softened with age? Absolutely. Do I phrase it differently now? Yes, but I'm not in crisis in the same way that we were coming through children than when I first met Alistair. We'd probably agree with that.
I think you probably have mellowed, actually. Yeah, I'm not going to make a joke about age here, but yeah, I think when you came through the system, I should just point out, just before I move on, that you have talked to Carl, and Carl is happy that we are talking about his and your experience, so we do have his consent to be able to discuss these things. So just for the record, I've said this on numerous little things. When I get somebody who comes through, and you normally get a bit of an elbow from other providers or whatever, that so-and-so is coming through and their parents are, whatever, anxious, or, there's additional needs, or the parents have been troubles in the past, or there's been X and Y. Those are the parents that, and I implore this to all professionals, pick up the phone to those parents first. Because actually what you've probably got there is an incredibly motivated, I don't want to use the word tool, and I don't mean that in any sort of derogatory.
Thanks, Alistair.
Works on a number of levels, that Helen. I'm deep in Northern. So you've got somebody who's motivated there, and actually what we want from as therapists and as clinicians is buy-in, ultimately. So actually, if you've got somebody who's going to be on board there, they're the first people to pick up the phone to, and and listen. So even if I've got a 20-page report, I'll still pick up the phone and say, right, let's talk, and Helen, I remember the first day we met on the assessment, and we spent a good amount of time. I think you came around on a view, like a view day, didn't you, before? Did you come on a tour before?
Yeah.
Right, you're testing my grey matter now. And just
So
take
you've done your homework then, Helen.
Oh, I knew what we were walking into.
And she still came. It's amazing.
I know.
It's amazing. But it's, I've sort of lost my train of thought a little bit, but it was around picking up the phone and being, I know that was it. And it was about picking up the phone, listening to the person, and then explaining what we can do. And then it was also explaining the limitations of the service and what we can't do. And I bang on about this, and I'll continue to bang on about it as long as I'm a clinician, is that managing people's expectations. And this is not saying that we're never going to do anything for you. This is just saying that this is what we can do, and this is what we can't do. And laying those things out at the start and asking what that person expects of you, and having those sort of groundings of, if it's not realistic for Carl, for example, to say, well, we're going to get Carl walking again in 2 years. You didn't come at that with us. But if you had, we'd have been like, okay, right, I need to take some time to talk to this person about this. But, what we're looking at is, let's try and find out where that person can be. And, say we didn't, and particularly, it was around hydro at that point, and we explained, well, this is how we work, this is our systems, and these are some of the reasons why, without going into too much detail. And I think that really, hopefully, set our relationship off professionally, Helen, on a good foot, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm still here.
Yeah,
so can't be that bad from my point of view.
Yeah, no,
and I think it's worth saying, yes, I know you personally through you're a therapist that treats Carl, but actually I know from a lot of different fingers in different pies, and with friends with children with disabilities, it's not just the physio buy-in, it's the fact that we could be labelled as difficult when our child is 5, and that goes through us, and nobody goes back and acknowledges that an incident happened when they were maybe 5, but that judgment just keeps going. It just keeps giving. Nobody ever gives us a clean slate. It's a bit like that transition to secondary school, isn't it? You've done something really stupid in year 1 at school. You transition to your secondary school with a load of new people, but somebody tells you what stupid thing you did in year 1. You hold on to that forever, and nobody breaks it down and gives you a chance, or allays your fears. Now and actually I've had that conversation with my sister earlier on today, because she was seeking some advice about supporting a friend. And actually, we feel under the microscope all of the time. Parenting is difficult. Parenting a child with additional needs of any description is beyond difficult. It's exhausting. It's everything that you'd expect and more. And we have so many different professionals involved in the care of our child. Somebody is always judging us. Now, some people manage to judge us without it showing on their faces. Most people don't, and if I can give you a heads up, Shaun, it's to make sure your face doesn't necessarily show what you're thinking inside sometimes. It's a really tough one, but actually we want to work with you. We don't want to be labelled as difficult. We want equal partnership, but we also want our young person with a learning disability to be actively involved in decisions about their care. And through children's, that doesn't happen. And then suddenly at 18, they're expected to make decisions, but no, not really, because we don't want to. And I think that's where things go wrong. You're not involving everybody in a decision about how to move something forward.
Certainly. I mean, I'm not going to get any arguments from me on that one. Helen, you touched on a point about being labelled with things that have gone wrong as children. And I think as much as this is a web chat series, it's talking about tough topics and learning disabilities, I think, we need to get this out into paediatric services and particularly neurological services, because a lot of those initial engagements with families will not be with an LD specialist, won't be with somebody who has additional knowledge of the legal systems and maybe how to, work with families. It will come through mainstream healthcare services. And I think, from speaking to families, and correct me if I'm wrong in your case, Helen, that, we, like you say, the people have been labelled from things that happened ages ago. And that can really mean that for every single engagement that somebody has with services as they go throughout their life, the default setting comes as one of, I've only ever got what I want, or only ever got heard if I am either assertive, and nothing necessarily wrong with being assertive, but potentially overly assertive. Some would argue combative. I wouldn't say that. I think, putting the needs of that person first, or particularly vocal, they are forced by the system to behave in a way that reinforces the stereotypes and the self-fulfilling prophecies around being a problem parent, because that's the only way you've ever been supported. Do you think that if parents were listened to in a different way throughout paediatric services, that might help or change, or do you think it would just,
No, absolutely. And I think I certainly reflect onto something when Carl was only 9 months old. He'd been admitted on a really regular basis to hospital because I was adamant he was seizing. Nobody had seen it, and I was absolutely adamant. I have a background, I'm a qualified nursery nurse. I've had friends that are epileptic. I knew I was seeing absences. I was labelled as a parent with mental health issues until one day I just so happened to have a junior doctor walk in while I was bathing him, who said, "How long's he been doing that?" Thank you very much. But the problem is, it was already down in his files that I had mental health issues to do with bringing up my child. And I probably did to a degree, because actually I was still processing that I had a child that was on a different journey. Rather than support me through that journey, I was left and therefore judged. And therefore, how could a parent like me possibly know what a seizure looked like in a 9-month-old child? Well, actually, I did know, and I was right. And then that means that every time I walk into an appointment in those, the next following years, my back's straight, brick walls up, and I'm ready for combat, which then isn't conducive to working. But if somebody had actually taken a different tack and go, can you describe what you've seen? Have you kept diaries of what you've seen? How often is this seen? Has anybody else seen it? It's a different conversation that is less about conflict and more about developing relationships. Because as we go through paediatrics, we develop an armour. It's not even a thick skin. It's a full-blown armour, top to tail, because actually we feel the world is coming at us, and it's not there holding our hands as we go through. Parents are expected to just crack on and get on with it and know everything, and we don't. But we're not allowed to show that vulnerability, because actually we've already got all these professionals judging our capabilities and our mental health. So therefore, we keep going with the armour, and we collect more baggage. So by the time somebody then turns around and asks us a different conversation, asks to engage with us in a different way, we have no idea what it feels like to go into a conversation without carrying that rucksack on our back.
I'm nodding my head off here because I'm just thinking back to a number of cases, but one in particular where there was a parent who came with a whole, they had a Senko, they'd got local authority involved, they've got a solicitor involved. And I remember having a holding professionals meeting where I work, and we all sat there, and she was like, "Well, no one's even listening, and no one wants to help." And I said, and I just sort of stopped the meeting and said, "There are 17 members of the college here right now, and we are here because we care about your son or daughter, and we care about getting things right. It's the start of the year. Tell us what you want, and we are here to listen because we care and we want to help." And she just burst out. She was like, "Nobody's ever said that." And I thought, well, no. And I thought, how can people not say that? But then the more I speak to other people, and this isn't saying I'm good at it and other healthcare professionals are. It's not saying that me and Shaun are great at this and other professionals aren't. There's been times where you and I, Helen, have had to have conversations, and we're both quite open and transparent with each other, and that's helped us to foster a positive working relationship. But we have to treat all engagements like that as therapists. And yeah, like you say, it is quite disarming, I think, for a lot of parents to go, "I'm here with you. I want what is the best for your son or daughter in the same way that you do. Let's look at how we can work together to get that."
Just for you both.
Sorry, go on, Shaun.
I was just thinking, so is it a case then, do you both find good faith in short supply, generally speaking, or does it change? Is it dependent? How is it in short supply, would you say?
I think time's changing. I think with the NHS long-term plan that came in a few years ago, there was a real chunk in it that looked at the importance of personalised care, which some people do really naturally. Alistair is one of those people. but for some people it doesn't come naturally. But actually it's all about putting the person in the centre, having the conversations around the individual, involving them in shared decision making and self-care, and those bits are starting to come together. And eventually I hope that, you know, by the time you've qualified and maybe got a few years experience, personalised care will be business as usual. So I think the system is changing. Is it changing fast enough? It's never going to change fast enough for me, but actually that's not a criticism of the workforce. The workforce are stunning. It's just that they're not always given permission to have a different conversation. Things are very definitely tightly railroaded as to where point A is and how to get to point B. Whereas a little bit of flexibility, you can get to point B by going through C, D and E, but you still get there, but you get better information and you get better engagement. I mean, I'm laughing in my head because Alistair will laugh. One of the things that we've done, Carl has had an awful lot of surgeries. I think he's 24 now, and I think we've just had number 46 or 47. Most of them are neuro. So we taught him that if people were putting him under pressure in a hospital environment, all he had to say was, I don't consent. So we've always done that. He knows his right. And when we hear that from him, we know that's a panic. Help, stop, I need to understand. We had a therapist who was adamant she was going to get him walking again. She didn't listen to what he wanted. And actually, in the end, he says, I don't consent and you're sacked. And then, you know, I laugh. He did what I'd empowered him to do. Was it the right way? Would I have preferred to come about it in a different way? Absolutely. Just because he's got learning disabilities doesn't mean he can't be part of that personalised care journey and be part of those shared decision-making processes. I think we've come a long way, but I think some way to go. What do you think, Alistair?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, to touch on your points, Helen, I think, you know, speaking about Carl specifically, he's certainly come a long way, and I think it's been really supported well by yourselves and, you know, other services to have that ability to self-advocate, you know, and speak his mind on certain things. And I know that they are particularly anxiety provoking for him. Again, this isn't supposed to be a loving on of, you know, you've been great parents and we've been great therapists. That's not.
Oh no. Before anybody actually makes a comment, there is no loving. I absolutely meet him head on when I need to. Please don't think that I've got a check coming in the post, because absolutely, Alistair would tell you that's not true with me.
I'm a Yorkshire Scotsman. There's ain't no money coming from me. Sorry, sure.
But just an observation on that, that's how it should be. I mean, you should be able to be, you know, forthright, and Alistair as a professional should be able to be receptive to that. And that's how you progress, as opposed to barriers going up on each side. And then, you know, we're back at square one, aren't we?
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, you can see that I've got a professional relationship with Alistair, but also his team, because actually we all have one aim, and that is to help Carl be the best he can be. But it's interesting when we talk about other learning difficulties. In my spare time, I do some work with the NHS at a strategic level, but also my passion is supporting families with children and young people with both physical and learning disabilities. And I supported a family that had a young girl. She was 10 years old, autistic. She'd not long been diagnosed as autistic. And for viewers watching, you know that girls present very differently to boys. They present often later, which can be quite difficult for some professionals to deal with. But I had a particular head teacher that was absolutely in denial. And, you know, she locked herself in the toilet because she chose to be challenging. She chose to be difficult. And therefore that ethos went all the way through the staff members. So, you know, supporting mum through that process was a real difficulty, but it's also incredibly sad from a parental point of view, because actually if there'd been collaborative working there, who knows, that child might not have needed to go to a special school. She could have accessed mainstream provision, which would have given her a wider social context to live her life. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with special schools. Carl went through the special school system and then the specialist college provision because that was what was right for him. But actually people need to have that choice. And if you put those barriers up and you refuse to engage, you are not going to get the best out of us. And we're here to work with you, not against you.
Certainly. I think a lot of professionals seem to be victims of circumstance when it comes to engaging with families. You know, as I mentioned before, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy that sometimes comes along with engaging with families of people with learning disabilities, in so much as the, you know, the problem parent label. And I don't think it takes a lot for professionals who are in systems that are potentially quite structured and rigorous, that give flexibility for those people to spend a little bit more time. You know, I know I've been accused before of preaching from an ivory tower in terms of therapy provision, in terms of having a place where I've got political freedom and time to engage people. But, you know, if you can remember, just as a professional, that first engagement with an individual, just go, right, tell me about yourself. What is it you want? You know, and the Equality Act is there to support people to give more time, you know, and again, that's another thing I preach about. To give people with learning disabilities and their families more time. You will need it. And if you don't, that's another time when things fall down. I think another thing we need to think about as professionals is, you touched on it before, Helen, is that we, when we are engaging with you, represent the man, the system. You know, we are a representative of healthcare and social care as a whole, where everything that is good about it and everything that is bad about it. And like you say, the people who necessarily make policy, you know, are sort of out of reach. So therefore, you know, Shaun Williams, learning disability nurse, comes round, or Kirsty Huntington, physiotherapist, comes to the door, and you represent the NHS and you represent social services and all that is good and bad about that. And you need to be prepared for that, you know, because people will come at you with that. But it's okay to also say, look, I understand that you're stressed. I understand, you know, I don't represent those services. Let's see how I can help in this situation right now. So just to move us forward a little bit, you know, we've touched on some of these things, but, you know, let's talk about what the impacts are for the individual. You know, if relationships do break down, what is the impact on the individual? What is the impact on the family? And potentially, what is the impact on future engagement with services?
You're certainly not going to get our buy-in. If it's got to the point that everything has broken down, we're not going to engage, but we're not just going to not engage with you. We're not going to engage with anybody, because actually if we've got to that point where we feel that nobody's listening, that nobody is supporting us to do the best for our child, and that we feel judged and that we feel often very disrespected, that we just won't bother, and we will try and be everything that our child or our young adult needs, because the system doesn't appear to support us. Now, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, that's just the reflection of where we are. And for me, it's really difficult to see parents get to that point and then people coming afterwards trying to then look at fixing relationships, which is, you know, such hard work for the professional on the other side and the workforce that are involved, because actually judgment breeds judgment. And, you know, it's like Chinese whispers from our point of view. We have a lack of engagement and a breakdown with one professional, and suddenly absolutely everybody in every single team knows that, and we feel they're judging us too. Now, that may not be the case, but that's how it feels. But actually the thing that gets missed is the person that needs the additional support, that extra time. That person is the person that loses out, and that's a great shame. I think it takes an awful lot of skill for somebody to come and pick up a family, a young person, an individual when they've got to that point and builds them back up. We've certainly had challenges where medics have judged and have just been downright rude. We had a particular person meeting the first time, Carl, insisted that Chris and I couldn't be part of the consultation because he was 18 now and he could do it all by himself. Carl was terrified. This guy was having none of it, and through this basically told him that if he wanted to, he could get up and walk, and also had he thought about committing suicide. Well, I'm really lucky Carl's got my sass, so he turned around to the consultant and said, have you tried to carry a hot drink when you've got crutches in both hands? And left it at that. But actually the suicide thing took 3 days before he let that out to us. He was sat having a drink with us and suddenly said, so what does suicide mean? But that then meant, as we unpacked how he felt about that particular appointment, he was already at the point there he said, that's it, I'm done. Not seeing that person. I don't want to see that profession anymore. Not going. Now, I was really lucky. I've got a GP that is incredibly person-centred, that worked with Carl, helped advocate. But I would say when things like that go wrong, and that wrong, it's probably taken us 2 years to build him back up to engage properly with that particular specialism. That just shows the damage that can be caused.
Yeah, and it's, I think everybody listening to this right now is, the gravity of that will certainly have sunk in. And, I've said myself, you mentioned about the sort of the Chinese whispers of, you do one thing and everyone knows about it. I mean, without naming their names, Shaun, you're been on a few placements now in clinical practice. I'm sure, what's your experience been on a professional side, and how we conduct ourselves and how we communicate with our families?
I have seen good practice. I've also seen, I'd probably say, poor practice. I mean, I've seen obviously students you would talk with your mentors or who's supervising you that day, and you do get the chats before, the brief before, and the debrief after, where comments are made about the person coming in or the person that's just left, which are totally inappropriate in my opinion, but they seem to then find their way into either that encounter, and it can get heated, or I suppose be what's the word, fed back to the team, the wider team, and then you'll come and do some follow-up work, and it's just yeah. So I have seen it does exist. It's that. And I suppose the thing is that people carry, then parents and the people they're supporting carry that stigma, I suppose, throughout the system, as you said, Helen.
I mean, I'm certainly a big grown-up girl that I do come from a northern background. I was brought up in Yorkshire. I was pretty unfiltered. Sorry, no, I'm not really. But if people like me can't come in and help educate and help change the system, my worry is always the parents that are beyond tired, that are beyond trying to put any more effort in engagement, that haven't got that capacity for a multitude of different reasons to stand up and shout and be counted. We live in a system that, as Alistair said earlier, those that shout loudest, that are very assertive, that are very vocal, sadly the system supports those parents, because let's be honest, professionals are human beings too. But actually they want to get somebody like me to shut up, and that quiet parent that is fairly unassuming but actually struggling far more is left because they're not a challenge. And I think it's really difficult, and it all comes back to relationship and communication. Most people can do anything as long as it's communicated well.
Certainly. So I think you touched on some really good points there around how, leads on to sort of my next question of, how can service providers, systems, us as individual professionals avoid the pitfalls of, burning down the bridges, at a very early age. What tips can we give people, Helen, from your point of view as a parent, and then, Shaun and I, you can give your student perspective, and I'll, hopefully have something that you've not covered, which probably won't be a lot, from my knowledge as well.
I mean, for me, it's about openness and transparency. One of the biggest criticisms that comes out of all the groups that I still support, and even at national strategic level, one of the biggest problems we have is lack of transparency. If we don't know what we don't know, nobody helps us navigate the systems. We're expected to learn that ourselves. And then when we do challenge the system, we're labelled as challenging. Actually, just tell us how it is. Tell us what the issues are. Be honest with us. We can work with honesty. If you tell me that actually you've only got 3 therapists and you've got a caseload of X, and you tell me that you promise you're going to do the very best for my child, but actually you can't deliver A and B, because I am far more likely to be reasonable than if you turn up to or probably don't turn up to an education, health and care plan annual review, because let's be honest, one of my biggest criticisms is that health seems to be absent from those processes. Now, that is a massive sweeping statement, I am well aware, but actually if you go back and you look at some of the places like Contact, the Autistic Society and so forth, you will find that actually it's not a bigger sweeping statement as you think. But actually, if you engage and you tell me what you can and can't do, and tell me what you want from me, parent, do you know what? We're going to not get to that point that we have, you know, brick walls between us and me with my full suit of armour. You know, we're going to have that relationship, and the only person that benefits from decent relationships is the person at the centre of the care needs.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. And Shaun, what are you taking from this?
Well, I'd like to add to it and probably throw it a little bit. Obviously, me being a student, you're registered, Alistair, so I might throw it back at you at the moment. So it's again, I've come at this angle. It's a bit baffled why there's this adversarial. We've discussed some of that, but also, you know, from that thinking, well, actually, from a professional standpoint or a student standpoint, you know, in that journey becoming a professional, is that well, we you know, part of being communicative, being reasonable, transparent, and all this, it should be part of being a professional. It should be the foundation, the baseline, and it just isn't. And you know, I just find that baffling again. So, but you know, that's just me. Could be just me.
I mean, I sit here as a professional thinking very similarly, and actually, I've watched. Obviously, my social media feed has very much a learning disabilities area and a sort of a physiotherapy area and a wider sort of healthcare and stuff that I'm interested in area. And on the physiotherapy side of things, what I've seen is an evolution over the past probably 2-3 years, particularly exacerbated through COVID even, of trying to spend more time improving our communication skills, improving our ability to build rapport and being transparent. And I've actually delivered a couple of webinar series on those two mainstream healthcare professionals. And, you know, I would like to think it's something that we would do naturally within learning disability services. Doesn't necessarily seem that case. And, you know, I think Shaun and I we spend a lot of time, you know, just chatting away about, you know, we sort of, what we do. Do we go too much into the social model of disability? Do you know, do clinicians or practitioners hide behind the social model of disability? Do we not address those things? Do we focus too much on the biomedical model of disability? And, you know, do we do too much of that? And there's a constant level of sort of weighing up of, you know, where is the right balancing point? But I think, you know, it's got to come from an undergraduate level. And I think that's throughout healthcare. If you look at, you know, all sorts of issues of any area where there's been sort of conflicts and scandal within NHS or healthcare or social services, you know, it just seems so confrontational and so litigious. You know, people just out for justice, and you know, it shouldn't be like that in the first place. But actually, I think there's a doctor that I follow, Mancunian medic David. Oh, I'm really sorry, David, I can't remember your surname. And he was saying they did some research into a number of NHS England payouts and lawsuits, and they found that a good proportion of those actually would have been stopped from proceeding had somebody at the point of something bad happening picked up the phone and said, "We're really sorry, this has happened." And for a good proportion of those, a significant proportion, that would have been the end of it, because somebody would have taken ownership and said, "I am sorry, this happened." And so he's another one who, you know, talking about that transparency and how it plays such an important part in engaging, you know, all areas of healthcare services. And, you know, honesty, integrity, and managing expectations is something that I actively preach when we're working with undergraduates and taking students on. But it comes down to communication, doesn't it, ultimately?
And just another point as well, when we're talking about not just communication, but what we're actually communicating. And I found as a pre-reg healthcare student, especially in learning disability services, we often aren't really able to explain that or articulate that very well from a professional side. So, for instance, if we say, that great sort of mystery of the universe, what does a learning disability nurse do, then if we're not able to say it and actually explain it and describe it, then we can't, it's more difficult to support people. I'm sure you get that in physio as well, or OT, and that it's a joke, isn't it? What does an OT do? We know what an OT does, by the way, an occupational therapist, but it's about articulating what people do as well.
Don't worry, Shaun, if you want to find out what a learning disability physiotherapist is, there's a 188-page document that you can spend your time on the toilet to find out.
I think for me, it's also worth saying that, obviously the focus of this is very much on learning disability, but we've got to be really, really careful that we don't box people in. Mm-hmm. I know I reflected pre this meeting that when we transitioned, and transition is a major point of conflict, and if transition is done well, it's life-changing for a family, but sadly it's still a point of real, cataclysmic change for families, and then professionals that then have to pick us up. But when we transitioned into adult services, it was, you can fit in a physical disability box or a learning disability box. Well, you tell me which part of that is about personalised care and individual support planning. So I suppose I'm also asking for anybody that's involved in learning disabilities that is watching this to remember you're part of a whole, and actually you need all the parts to make the whole thing work properly. Don't try and pigeonhole people where you want them to be. Meet them where they are, not where you expect them to be. And actually that'll go an awful lot better for you as well. And that's a major pitfall for me, is that, we don't belong in boxes.
Oh, Helen, you've just given me some great titles for this podcast now, that we've meet them where they are, not where you expect you want them to be. That's a really good one. And yeah, I'm going to get whiplash again from nodding so much. I think it comes to, and again, I reiterate this point when I do any sessions where somebody listens to what I'm saying, is these skills of openness, transparency, engagement, managing expectations, they're not unique. They're not unique to learning disabilities. They will enhance every single contact that you have, whether you're a physio, whether you're a social care practitioner, whether you're Joe Blogs off the street who's happened to stumble on this due to some sort of YouTube algorithm. Those things will help you in every day of your life with every single person that you meet, and they will enhance future contacts and clinical contacts. This is not a magic set of skills that will only work with people with learning disabilities and their families. In any situation where there's lots of professionals or families engaging, it comes down to communication at the end of the day. So, guys, we did have a quick point about, I think, sort of to wrap up a little bit, but COVID-19, one of the follow-on points I was going to try and naturally got into there with I'm shoehorning in now with a sledgehammer, was about has COVID, what's the effect of COVID and impact of COVID been on families, on engagement with services? And Helen, you can speak from a very personal point of view on that one.
It's been a really tough 12 months. I know it's been tough for everybody, and there's a lot of information out there if you want to go looking about the impact of COVID on families with children with special educational needs and disabilities. We were isolated to start, we're invisible now, for very good reasons. Therapeutic input and healthcare input, as well as social care input and short breaks, disappeared in the first lockdown because it was such an unknown quantity. Schools did go back, but in a context of relaxation around the laws around supporting people with an education, health and care plan. And I think all that made us as a community feel was even less worthy than they were to start with. And I think through that, there's been, we were part of the protected characteristics and inequalities bit anyway, but I think all that's done is exacerbate those gaps, exacerbate those inequalities. It's not the services around us that are at fault for not being involved physically and looking after our young people. It's just that we've had to give time for those things to happen in a different way. Therapy can be done virtually. Appointments are being done virtually, but that takes time. And services are still not up and running properly. I heard recently of an autistic 5-year-old expected to engage with speech and language therapy online. Well, good luck with that is all I'm going to say. I'm not sure I could do speech and language therapy with a 5-year-old anyway, but this child doesn't sit still, it doesn't engage because it can't. And so actually that young 5-year-old is going to be adversely affected by COVID. That inequality has widened because they've not had the support that they would have had 12 months ago. And that's not a criticism, it's just realistic. Another family that I spoke to the other day, their hoist is broken. Tracking hoist is broken, and they're going to be without a hoist for 2 weeks. They're carrying their 12-year-old up and down a flight of stairs. 1, that's unsafe, but 2, there's no solution for them. And because they feel that the world out there is busy enough and health are absolutely barraged, they're not fighting. They're just getting on with it. And actually, it's not just the child's needs, it's the family's needs, because the wider impact is if the family members can't meet the needs of a 12-year-old and they have nervous breakdowns or major back injuries, actually that's going to have an even bigger effect on the needs of the child. And I think we've got to be really careful that, again, it comes back to that transparency, it comes back to communication, it comes back to telling families that there are services still out there and running. And I think looking at some of the figures that have come out to do with the deaths of people with learning disabilities from COVID, they are horrifying. And I think, when we look back and we properly investigate those, I think there's going to be some massive learning.
Yeah. It's a shame, again, with learning disabilities, we have to get to a situation where we're learning from deaths rather than preempting and thinking ahead. But, such is the way. And I get that COVID's been, very acute and hit us all very, very rapidly. But as soon as it came apart, I'm sure there were quite a few of us who thought this is not going to go well for people with learning disabilities. And like you say, it's been put to the bottom of the pile.
I just think it's a sobering point and an important point.
Yeah, I think the only bit of advice I'd have is if you want to understand or learn, there are some great courses out there about how to do personalised care well. Ask the question, be vulnerable, tell somebody you don't know the answer. That's all absolutely fine. We've all got to learn. Don't do it on your own.
Yeah, I think the same goes for healthcare staff. That's a really good point. We're not good at saying we don't know. And there are many things out there within healthcare that healthcare still doesn't understand and doesn't know. So again, it's okay to say I don't know. One other tip I would give healthcare professionals is follow some parents, on social media. If you finding this through Twitter, Helen, you are on Twitter. Feel free to share your Twitter handle if you want to.
Yeah, I'm Helen Hassell too.
And Helen, you want to hopefully get some more followers from this, and follow other families, because a lot of them, Dan White's another one, parent of somebody with a learning disability, or a broadcaster as well. There's so many people out there who are parents of people with learning disabilities who sort of blog their lives, their experiences and challenges, and sometimes it's really hard to read, but it's been a real grounding for me personally as a professional, to understand the other side of the coin. And it hasn't been pretty this year. It hasn't been pretty. I just hope that it improves. So, Shaun, Helen, thank you ever so much for your time, and particularly you, Helen, who's coming on short notice, and Shaun, you're in the middle of clinical placement, so we do appreciate both of your time. That wraps it up for today, and we will see you all again for the next one. See you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.